Okay, I have to put a little disclaimer or warn you in the beginning. I'm not going to really reveal any data. A lot of my sort of alarming stories have to do with just personal experience and what I experienced in the field. Within NOAA, I'm working in a group called the Global Monitoring Division. And what we do in the Global Monitoring Division is monitor the globe. It's the radiation, aerosols, greenhouse gases, and ozone depleting substances. And we really strive to make the highest accuracy, long-term measurements that are available. So at the Global Monitoring Division, we take air samples and measure air samples. And we measure them from towers, aircraft, and our van, which is kind of a new addition. And then there's also another addition where we measure greenhouse gases, which is called an air core, which is where we take a balloon and take a length of tubing and send it up into the atmosphere, drop it down, and get a profile of the atmosphere that way. One tower is in Colorado. It's the Erie Tower, where we continuously measure carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, methane, and we actually have ozone measurement there also. Here's a picture of the Weld County and the Denver-Julesburg Basin, and these are all oil and gas wells, all the orange dots. Carbon dioxide and carbon and methane are the major greenhouse gases, and there's something that we call the annual greenhouse gas index, which kind of adds them all together and gives their relative contributions, and you can look at it historically to see what's happening in terms of the forcing, the radiative forcing, and how that could be adding to global warming, or is. And methane being the second biggest contributor is pretty important. So understanding its budget, its sources and sinks is a good chunk of why we got involved in looking at natural gas. And so then we got, I think, a contract, and we were actually paid by the oil and gas industry to go to Utah and measure the atmospheric chemistry there. Because they have a high ozone problem, similar to the Denver-Julesburg. They were seeing very high ozone levels and wanted to understand the chemistry and how they could reduce, come into compliance. We also went to the Barnett oil field in Texas. We went into cooperation with the Chemical Sciences Division, so we're in the Global Monitoring Division, but in the Chemical Sciences Division, they have been making measurements for quite some time, not so targeted at individual sources like we have been with our oil and gas measurements. We also went out to and made some measurements in Weld County with the Environmental Protection Agency. This guy here is holding a FLIR camera, or infrared camera, and we looked at some off-gassing coming off the top of this tank, and then we were also trying to measure. We were trying to take measurements of it. Just recently, there's this tight oil and gas, which is in shale and these other formations, and they use fracking to extract that. This is a map of all the oil and gas resources in the United States that are known right now. Fracking, I'm assuming most people in the room know what it is, but it's basically they put a pipe down in the ground, just like they do for sort of traditional oil and gas extraction. Then they pump with high volume and pressure. They pump water and chemicals and sand and it comes out the holes and it fractures the rock and allows these little bubbles of gas to make it back into the pipe. Okay, this is kind of interesting to me. Here's all the components of oil and gas production. From the well, they separate oil from other things like water, and goes to processing. It's compressed, goes into a pipeline, and eventually makes it to a power plant or any consumer. So here's what we do is we look at all those components and we make measurements with our mobile vehicle, whatever that is, our van or car. There's a lot of chemistry in the gas that comes out, but it's mostly methane. But there's these other hydrocarbons, and including these air toxics, benzene and toluene. So on a global scale, the oil and gas operations and burning of fossil fuels affects climate. But and then on a more regional scale with the oil and gas, there's air quality. And then in a really local scale, like when you're driving around in a van and smelling this stuff, there's concerns about health. So in terms of measuring the impacts and what's making it into the environment, there's a couple ways to do it. One is to measure the air. Another way is to try for the producers to estimate how much is leaking at every point, and then give a cumulative estimate of what that is. For natural gas to have less of a greenhouse effect than coal, it needs to be less than 3.2% of the total production in, I guess, use of natural gas. And recently there's been some publications, one from our work in Utah and one in Colorado, that found much higher numbers. Our estimates of what the leak is by making our measurements of the atmosphere are that it's quite a bit higher than what's been previously thought and reported by the Environmental Protection Agency. So what we do is we get a map, and we had a big poster board that Gabby carries in the van, and she's like, okay, we're going to go down this road, and then we're going to go and look at this. So here's a typical drive where we take a certain route and kind of drive around, and then you can see in certain areas there's elevated levels of methane. On this particular drive, it got up to 5 parts per million. Typically the background is around 1.8. So here we'll get near something like this. And a lot of times the wind is variable, or it kind of shifts and it goes one way or another. So we'll drive back and forth, and typically what we try to do is we get in a plume of something like this, and then we take an air sample, and then we're after the signature of that air sample. So we look at the signature of the wells compared with the signature of gas leaks that we see at a compressor station, and then we'll even try to separate the signature of these tanks from the signature of the burner, and we'll try to get samples from both. So here's a fracking site. Now this is really awesome. It's really cool to see a fracking operation. They take all these trucks and they plumb them together with I don't know how big the diameter of the tubing is, or the pipe, and then they get all their engines running. They're putting all the energy into pumping the fracking fluid back into the well, into the wellhead. So when we were in Utah, we measured this site a lot. We kind of kept coming back to it because there was a lot of gas leaking out in that location. It actually smelled kind of bad. It smelled like hydrogen sulfide. So after they finished doing their fracking in Utah, they have these open pits, which they don't do here in Colorado. They actually capture the flow back. And in these open pits, after they put all the water down into the well, it comes bubbling back up before the gas starts to come up. And they put it in the pit. They line the pit with this plastic. And then I think they just give it time, and it evaporates over time. And then they take all this plastic and they fold it up and they put it in the pit, and then they plow it back in. This is this is kind of up close looking at this is all the fracking fluid, and then these are the trucks that pump it to high pressure and push it into the well. So we take these flask measurements in the van, and we have our real-time Picaro where we're keeping track of the methane, and methane is usually, when there's high methane, it means we're breathing something interesting. These guys joined us, and they put in the back, they put this at a PTRMS. It's called a proton transfer reaction mass spectrometer. They take a lot of hydrocarbons, they strip them I think they strip them of an electron, they become one charge positive, and then they go through a mass spec, and they can get, and they measure some 150 different types of compounds that are in the air, or molecules that are in the air. And this was, at this particular fracking site, after we got this PTRMS in the van, these guys got really excited, and they wanted to go out there and measure it. And we're all like huddled in the van, and it smells really bad. And so what happens is your eyes start to burn, your throat starts to burn, and we're driving back and forth on the road, and these guys are getting all excited, and they don't care. Like, they're way more interested in their science than they are in their health. So anyways, that night somebody comes from the gas well. I got his business card, got out and talked to him, got his business card. He was the health safety officer, and he's like, "Is there something we should know?" Yeah. That night, this is sort of the measurements that are coming off of the PTRMS, and the benzene toluene at that particular location in that time was, and this was downwind of the fracking site where the flowback had come. Benzene was close to the 15-minute exposure limit for OSHA, so close to that limit that I had posted up there. Dish, Texas is another place that we went, and so we were down in the Barnett, and we went there, and so we drive back and forth past these things, and we try to get in the plumes, and we talked to the mayor there, the new mayor, because the old mayor left town, in my opinion, very wisely. The residents are complaining about health problems, and people are dying of cancer, and there's been a lot of studies done about it in that region. So one day after making measurements there, I was sitting in the van, we try to get in, we go back and forth, we get in the plume, and we take a sample. So we're sitting in this plume, and it was too high. Sometimes we get, the methane is too high, and we know we can't take a sample because it'll overwhelm our instruments. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I like, whoa, the van's moving. And I was like, I better put it in park, and it was already in park. And I was like, that's weird, because the van was moving, but it was in park, and so I was basically hallucinating that the van was moving. And I'm fairly certain now at this point that happened because whatever we were breathing had something in it that caused a disequilibrium. Okay, one more story. The Utah evap pond. So when we were in Utah, we went down this road, and you can see all the oil wells up here, and they take their wastewater and they put it in these evaporation ponds, and we went near the evaporation ponds to measure, to make measurements. So here we are at this location, and we drove in this valley, and we actually, when we were here at night, when the air settles down and it doesn't, during the day it mixes up higher, you get these concentrations coming off these evap ponds, and they sent our CO analyzer negative, so we're reading negative CO. But so when that carbon monoxide went negative, it was really like nasty. And I was like, and I told Gabby at one point, I said, I'm not going back there. I'm not going to go back there. I don't know what's in the air. I don't know, but I don't feel safe there. Another interesting thing, I have it on my poster back there. So they take the wastewater from well locations, put it in trucks, bring it to this location. This is a disposal site. They pay the disposal contractor, whoever owns these ponds, to dispose of their waste there. But then we saw one of these trucks spreading water on the road, and it was like, well, is that the water that they're supposed to be paying to dispose of? I don't know. But there is, I mean, I don't know who monitors that, but it is concerning. And we did actually take water samples of after that truck went, but we later learned that you have to do it a certain way in order for the chemistry not to be disturbed in the sample. This particular compressor in Weld County is really leaky, so we've gone back there numerous times, and it also has a lot of hydrogen sulfide coming off, and I think she identified that it was coming out of like this tube or one of these tubes. But there was an aircraft study of the whole Denver-Julesburg basin, and we got this amount of emissions coming out, and she said that this one leaky compressor accounted for a very large amount of the emissions coming out of the basin. So one of the arguments is that there's some leaky places. It's kind of like having a bunch of holes in the bucket, and it's these biggest holes that if they can plug these biggest holes, that it'll make oil and gas operations a lot cleaner. Okay, I think this is the last one, and this is my house right over here, and then here's a Boulder open space trail right here, and here's a compressor station. I put this Picaro analyzer, which I have in the back of the room for show and tell later, and stuck it at my house, and it got really high, around 10 parts per million, which at that, there's a lot of stuff in the air when you have 10 parts per million of methane. There's a lot of things in that sample, so I'm not really feeling as good as I used to about sleeping outside and feeling like I live in a clean environment. Sometimes you don't have a solid answer, like people are dying, and you don't have a solid answer till 10 or 20 or 30 years later as to why they died. You just have to, but if you're that person living in that town and you're like, and you know something's wrong, you don't want to wait for the science to come out and tell you that. You just, I don't know, that's my take, that's my opinion. I think down the road that if the regulations become more strict, that they probably will invest in their, one of our analyzers costs $100,000, but really that's really not that much for an oil and gas. And then if they're indeed losing 4% from their operations, that's a lot of money. Here's some links of some stuff I just found. I'll leave that up, but thanks everyone.